Is adultery no longer a big deal in Indiana and in America? I'd just love to know your thoughts. I, for one, believe that the seventh commandment, contained in the 10 Commandments, is still a big deal. It's the most important promise you'll ever make. And holding people accountable to those promises and holding people accountable to respecting the promises that other people make. To me, what could possibly be a bigger deal?
You can do anything. Grab them by the...
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Dear daughters, we want so much for you. We want you to grow up proud and strong in an America that believes in you, believes in your worth, believes in your potential to be whomever you want to be. Free of name-calling.
Crazy Nancy. She was nastier than even Pocahontas. That fat, ugly face of hers.
Free of body shaming.
She would not be my first choice, that I can tell you.
Free of bullying.
That's okay, I know you're not thinking. You never do.
I'm sorry?
Where ambition is applauded, not vilified, because ambition is not a dirty word. Where confidence is celebrated, not torn down. Where there is no height you cannot reach. We want you to be proud to be nasty. Nasty isn't a 4-letter word. It's who you are. Strong, determined, brave. This is the America we want for you. For you, dear daughters. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content.
Football back. These are young, strong guys. They're not going to be affected by the virus. If you look at it, it's generally older people that have heart conditions, that have diabetes, that have problems. I've been calling for football to be back, including Big Ten. Big Ten, get with it. Open up your season, Big Ten.
The CDC says older people are at an increased risk of death from coronavirus.
The response by this administration couldn't have been worse. This president lacks every conceivable quality necessary for leadership in a crisis.
It did not have to be like this in the United States of America.
They are dying. That's true. It is what it is.
Midas Touch is responsible for the content of this advertising.
The reviews are in.
You have to go by where... Look.
Here's what Trump's own people are saying about him. He's a f***ing moron. Rex Tillerson, Trump's Secretary of State.
We're lower than the world.
Lower than the world. He tries to divide us. James Mattis, Trump's Secretary of Defense.
You had a group on one side. We can never have a situation where things are going on as they are today.
What? But that
John Meacham.
He's president, isn't he?
John Meacham. When in American history have you ever heard a president actually running against himself and condemning the chaos that his presidency hath wrought upon America? We can never have a situation where things are going on as they are today. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. Almost 200,000 Americans dead from a pandemic that this president has ignored, marching in the streets.
There's mourning in America. Today, more than 175,000 Americans have died from a deadly virus Donald Trump ignored, praising China's response instead of heeding the warnings, then blaming them to cover his own failures. With the economy in shambles, more than 30 million Americans are out of work, the worst economy in decades. This afternoon, millions of Americans will apply for unemployment. And with their savings run out, many are giving up hope. Millions worry that a loved one won't survive COVID-19. There's mourning in America. And under the leadership of Donald Trump, our country is weaker and sicker and poorer. And now, Americans are asking, if we have another 4 years like this, will there even be an America?
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Oh man, come on. I tell you what. Don't let it define you. You are smart as hell. You really are. You can do that. Can I get a phone number for you and I can tell you what I used to do? There's about 25 stutterers I continue to work with, but I promise you you can do it. And you know when I say I know about bullies, you know about bullies. The kids who make fun.
Bullies are cowards who tear others down.
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
Knock the crap out of him, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees. I promise.
It's time for decency. It's time for Joe Biden.
It's going to change, honey. I promise you. I promise you. Is it all right if I call him Dad?
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
It's the greatest responsibility of a president to help keep Americans safe, to protect our families. Donald Trump has failed this solemn duty. Over 170,000 Americans have died in the past few months from COVID-19. Millions are infected, and there is no plan. No plan to contain the virus, no plan to make it safe for businesses to reopen, no plan to reopen schools. In this time of national crisis, Donald Trump did what he always does. He lied. He bragged. He blamed. He never led because Donald Trump is not a leader. This time it's personal. Donald Trump's ignorance and incompetence is threatening your family's safety. It's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about protecting our families.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
He failed. He must go. On November 3rd, vote to protect your family. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Mr. President, thank you so much. Thank you very much. This is great. Yeah, let me have a pen. Hey, could I have a pen, Johnny? Give me a few minutes. Here, come on over here. He looks like a good man. What's his name? Come here. Come here. Come here, pal. Let's get over here. I want a little power.
We gotta just keep a little, yeah. The president asked for it.
I want them over here. These are the guys. Here, sell this tonight on eBay. You'll get 10,000.
If you will, just try to keep your distance. Okay. You know, just put your mask on for me, guys.
Who's going to get this one? Sell it tonight on eBay, 10,000.
Trump Town, USA, big name, Cameron
Thank you. Thank you, fellas. We okay?
Yep.
Let's go, Steve.
Cameron is the parish that delivered me the highest percentage of any parish or
Delivered
county
me?
in the country.
Oh, that's
The sheriff's right there.
Which is the sheriff?
The sheriff right over here. This one right over here, yeah.
Come on over. So we're okay? Everything?
Sheriff.
People look good? Give me a piece of paper. Give me your...
Sheriff.
You have a tag?
Yeah. Sheriff.
Give me a piece of paper.
Yeah, yeah.
Mike, how are you, man?
So you'll be okay, right? Won't be pleasant.
This parish delivered the highest
You'll get it back,
of
yeah.
any parish.
Now,
Get a mask, put it on, guys.
if I put your name down, it loses a lot of value. So just sell it tonight on eBay. Give me another one, John.
Donald Trump has changed Washington.
More than 180,000 lives now lost in America to this coronavirus.
The U.S. leading the world in deaths.
We are now at the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression.
More than 1 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits last week. That was more than expected.
Food banks, already hit hard by high demand, are bracing for even more people in need.
The results speak for themselves.
What is it? What is it about the Democratic Party that makes it the instrument the people use when they search for ways to shape their future? We are a party of innovation. We are willing to suffer the discomfort of change in order to achieve a better future.
It's time to get back up.
Midas Touch is responsible for the content of this advertising.
A socialist agenda, violent anarchists, catastrophic betrayals and blunders would eliminate America's borders. They will demolish the suburbs. A Trojan horse for socialism. Wild-eyed Marxist mob rule. Rioting, looting, arson, and violence, soul-crushing conformity. God bless you and God bless America.
Heading into this week, Donald Trump promised his convention would portray an optimistic, uplifting message for the country. Of course, for those watching, it was not quite that. Dan Rather summed the week up best, tweeting, "The Trump reelection strategy seems to be to argue that only Donald Trump can save America from Donald Trump's America."
Last week, Joe Biden didn't say one word about the violence and chaos engulfing cities across this country. So let me be clear. The violence must stop, whether in Minneapolis, Portland, or Kenosha. Too many heroes have died defending our freedom to see Americans strike each other down. We will have law and order on the streets of this country for every American of every race and creed and color.
Yeah, actually, Mike Pence, earlier that day, Joe Biden did condemn the violent protests. Take a listen.
What I saw in that video makes me sick. Once again, a black man, Jacob Blake, has been shot by the police in broad daylight with the whole world watching. You know, I spoke to Jacob's mom and dad, sister, and other members of the family just a little bit earlier, and I told them justice must and will be done. Put yourself in the shoes of every black father and black mother in this country and ask, is this what we want America to be? Is this the country we should be? You know, as I said after George Floyd's murder, protestality is a right and absolutely necessary, but burning down communities is not protest, it's needless violence. Violence that endangers lives, violence that guts businesses and shutters businesses that serve the community. That's wrong. Let's unite and heal, do justice, end the violence, and end systemic racism in this country now.
Right. So, Mike Pence, note to Vice President Mike Pence, if you want to make a big applause line about something Joe Biden didn't say, maybe check whether or not he said it. Not sure the Republican Party cares. More from Mike Pence's, Vice President Mike Pence's speech last night, in which he looked to rebut Joe Biden's claim that President Trump has failed to protect Americans against the coronavirus pandemic. Take a listen.
As we speak, we're developing a growing number of treatments known as therapeutics, including convalescent plasma, that are saving lives all across America. Now, last week, Joe Biden that no miracle is coming. Well, what Joe doesn't seem to understand is that America is a nation of miracles. And I'm proud to report that we're on track to have the world's first safe, effective coronavirus vaccine by the end of this year. After all the sacrifice in this year like no other, all the hardship, we're finding our way forward again.
No, we're not. The U.S. death toll has now hit 180,000 people. And speaking of Joe Biden, maybe what the miracle was is that in January, he knew this was coming, and that the Obama White House actually had a pandemic office that the President Trump actually broke down and got rid of everybody. Would have been much more prepared had you kept that office intact. But Joe Biden did spell out very clearly in a USA Today opinion piece that maybe Vice President Mike Pence and President Trump should read, warning America of this coming pandemic and of all the lives that could be lost. But now we have lost them, and we are losing more. We're at 180,000 deaths, and you're going to trump pathetic potential vaccines and therapeutics that may or may not work? No. You can't claim victory after 180,000 deaths, many of which could have been avoided had this had been handled better. And everyone knows that, especially those who are doctors and scientists and who are leading the way, or those serving on the front lines. They know this didn't have to happen, and that people working on the front lines didn't even have the proper equipment and PPE to fight this pandemic because this government, this president, did not give it to them. Pence also claimed that Democrats don't want to talk about their agenda.
My fellow Americans, we're passing through a time of testing, but soon we will come to a time for choosing. Joe Biden has referred to himself as a transition candidate. And many were asking, transition to what? But last week, Democrats didn't talk very much about their agenda. And if I were them, I wouldn't either.
The Republican Party, for the first time in its 166-year history, didn't issue a policy platform this year. In fact, it was really hard to keep up with the lies.
It's wild because, I mean, to base on what Rachel said, Mike Pence stood up and he said, he's speaking as if the coronavirus is over, right? Yeah. And, here's the success. Banning people from traveling from China brought us a time to launch the greatest national mobilization since World War II. President Trump marshaled the full resources of the federal government and directed us to forge seamless partnerships with governors across America in both parties. That's the opposite of true. I mean, they're literally, and that's been the difficulty of watching this over the last 3 days. They are creating a separate and new reality that is the complete opposite of reality, and just saying it with a straight face in droning fashion into the camera. And it's scary to think that they really do believe that and they probably are tens of millions of people that will just accept that reality. But meanwhile, as Rachel just said, the actual humans standing in front of them or sitting in front of them applauding are in danger of dying from COVID now. And they don't care. It's bizarre. And the one last thing, not to sound like a broken record, as I mentioned last night, I can't get over this misuse of the resources that don't belong to them. Mike Pence here at Fort McHenry, which you can't visit, I can't visit, Nicole and Rachel can't visit, we can't bring our families there. They only open it for their personal use for a political event. It's just wrong.
I mean, they're in on the grift. I mean, what strikes me, Brian, is that we've covered the Washington Post lie tracker. It's up to, 23,000 lies. There's a reason they told all those lies. So that when we heard them say sentences like this tonight, the hard truth is you won't be safe in Joe Biden's America. Under President Trump, we'll stand with those who stand on the thin blue line, and we're not going to defund the police. Not now, not ever. So Pence basically announcing he joins Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in being against defunding the police. But they told 22,000 lies before that, so that when people like us say, oh, that was a lie, the Trump base has heard lie, lie, lie so many times that they're like, oh, lie, schmai. And then another one, here from Mike Pence. And it's just interesting that he's in on it, because before he was, in a buddy movie with Donald Trump, he was a normal-ish Republican, never would have been a nominee or a national figure, I don't think, in his own right. But he said yes, as they say. This is also from Pence's speech. Joe Biden has referred to himself as a transition candidate. Many are asking a transition to what? Last week, Democrats didn't talk about their agenda. Well, this is a convention, or convention-like event without a platform. It literally is devoid of an agenda as a strategy. It doesn't have one because the platform was ripped up, burned down, and it just says we're enthusiastically for Donald Trump. So, you know, the 22,000 lies make a lot more sense because when they lie about big stuff, in the context of an election that's 68 days away, all the Trump base hears is people like us saying, you know, lie meter, add 2.
Well, last night I was angry. You know, tonight I found myself just feeling flat worn out by this festival of lies. Although I will admit my blood pressure went up when Pence started talking about law and order with 2 campaign banners spread out over a national monument, which of course is illegal. But it is hard to listen to speaker after speaker tell lie after lie after lie and not just want to, you know, throw up your hands in disgust and just give up on these guys. It is unbelievable how many lies were told, from the president protecting pre-existing conditions to that he's brought the troops home to the fact that Angela Merkel respects him. I mean, all of them told just blatant lies.
People in charge, from the governor of Wisconsin on down, refused to enforce the law. They stood back and they watched Kenosha burn. So are we really surprised that looting and arson accelerated to murder? How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would?
Lawrence O'Donnell, your thoughts?
Well, that's Rupert Murdoch financing vigilantism. This is a conscious business decision made by Rupert Murdoch and his son that this is what they want to tell America. Of course, there was a very big police presence out there when that 17-year-old went out there. In fact, the 17-year-old was given a water bottle by police, some of whom considered it to be helpful to have these vigilantes out there in the streets doing this. It does seem, as we sit here tonight, like an inevitable outgrowth of what's been happening with Trump rhetoric, with the concept of open carry and bring my rifle to every public demonstration. And there you see him. There you see this 17-year-old just firing away right there. And I'm supposed to talk over this as if it's a normal piece of video to run under cable news dialogue. A kid, a misguided kid who's shooting other people with the active encouragement of the Fox propaganda channel.
Montage of the flavor that we've gotten over the last couple nights.
Donald wants to keep your family safe.
Look at what's happening in American cities. Crime, violence, and mob rule.
They want to disrespect our national anthem by taking a knee while our armed forces lay down their lives every day to protect our freedom.
Your family will not be safe in the radical Democrats' America.
We must fight to save America now, or we may lose her forever.
Carly Fiorina, thank you so much for being here. What do you make of that when you put that in the context that the crime and violence that we've seen has been at someone shooting at Black Lives Matter protesters, shooting 2 people, and having a social media that's riddled with not Black Lives Matter, you know, stuff, but things that are pro-police, pro-Trump? What do you make of it?
Well, this is exactly why I'm backing Joe Biden, because we must have a man, a leader of empathy, of humility, of compassion, of collaboration, who's actually willing to tackle this problem of racial injustice and begin to solve it. I mean, when you juxtapose that montage that you just played against the videotape of what happened in Kenosha to Mr. Blake, yes, I understand and appreciate that due process is necessary for justice to be served. But as an American watching that videotape, all I can say is, as I hope all Americans can see with their own eyes, there is no justification for this, ever. Just as there was no justification for George Floyd, just as there is no justification for so many other of these instances. We must grapple with this problem, and we must solve this problem. And so I have to say, I applaud the NBA players tonight, because I think it's one more way to send a message that this isn't going away. We have to grapple with it, and we must make progress.
You know, and Michael, we've seen a couple of things here. We've seen the, this sort of, wide-eyed worship of Trump from some people those who didn't get canceled because there was like other sort of insane, off the key things that they believe in. But you've also seen this use of the White House in a way that I have to say really bothered me. Last night you had this surprise naturalization ceremony. Two of the people that were in it didn't even know. They weren't warned. At least the two who were able to respond to reporters were told that they were not even told that they were going to be filmed and that was going to be used and featured and that Trump was going to be there. And they've said they didn't mind being featured, but they weren't told in advance. It was literally staged for TV, while tens of thousands of immigrants are not being able to be naturalized because Trump won't let them. And Melania Trump, who has the lowest of bars, particularly versus Michelle Obama, who, because she said like a couple of nice things, she said them from the Rose Garden that they used sort of as their personal property. I don't know. I'm just going to let you talk.
No, I agree with you. When I heard you last night, Joy, I thought you were absolutely right in saying that this was an abuse of the White House. You remember, it was just a week ago that President Obama said, don't let them take away your democracy. So I've been watching this convention for reassuring signs that that's not going to happen if Donald Trump was reelected, and I have not seen them. I saw a Secretary of State for the first time in at least 80 years appearing at a Republican convention talking about domestic politics. That's not supposed to happen. Yeah. Mrs. Trump turned the White House last night into a convention hotel with donors and audience and clapping. That's not supposed to happen. U.S. Marines were used as props in that ceremony that you were talking about. That is not supposed to happen. The same thing with those new citizens. What this tells me is these things remind me of what happens in an authoritarian country, not a democracy, in a place where the symbols of the state are mixed up with domestic politics. It should make all of us nervous. Democracy and liberty, all eternal vigilance.
Carly Fiorina, this is I turned on the TV. My husband and I went to Cuba a couple of years, and I turned on the TV one day just to see what it looked like. It reminded me of that, right? It felt a bit North Korean this night, where the symbols of the state are owned by by the dear leader, and therefore it's the dear leader's house, not your house. It's the dear leader. They seem to, and they laugh about it. There's reporting today that the White House Chief of Staff and Mark Meadows and the others, they kind of laugh about it. They think they don't care that people know this is illegal. They laugh about it, and they say they can do whatever it is they want because the Trump family is a royal family. You've been on the receiving end of the way that Donald Trump speaks about women. But, Melania Trump is used as an example of, see, she's an immigrant, she's a woman. What do you make of just that aspect of it, the sort of pleading his case, the way that the case was made for him last night?
Well, first, unfortunately, and I agree with everything Michael just said and agree with your points as well. First, none of us should be surprised that Donald Trump knows how to put on a TV show. That is who he is. He's not a leader. He's an entertainer. He always has been. I said that way back in 2015. So none of us should be shocked or surprised that he puts on a great show with whatever setting and whoever the props happen to be. He puts on a great show. And unfortunately, while I share your outrage at the way the symbols of the state, the people's house, has been used, I share your outrage over Mike Pompeo. I think many people are not paying attention to that. But what they are paying attention to is the problems that have festered, whether it's an economy that is structurally unequal or racial justice or the pandemic. Those problems aren't getting solved. And so now we need someone who can solve them.
We shall see what happens in this election.
no matter where you live, your family will not be safe in the radical Democrats' America.
Crime, violence, and mob rule.
Crime ravaging our streets. That is what America would see if it allowed Biden-Harris to run this country.
Trump was elected to protect our families from the vengeful mob.
They want to abolish the suburbs altogether.
Nightmares are becoming real. Cops killed, children shot.
Drug addicts, guns on the street.
The mob will try to destroy you.
They want to enslave you to the weak, dependent, liberal, victim ideology.
Burn down the foundations of our country to the ground.
Spawns of Satan. You will not recognize this country or yourself.
The American way of life is being dismantled.
Anarchy and chaos on our streets.
This election is shaping up to be church, work, and school versus rioting, looting, and vandalism.
The police aren't coming when you call.
They want to steal your liberty, your freedom.
They'll disarm you, empty the prisons, lock you in your home.
They want to control what you see and think and believe so that they can control how you live.
It's a horror film, really.
It's madness.
That was just night one of the Republican convention. Isn't that good?
I spent my career figuring out how to talk to suburban moms. None of them have read the book. That doesn't work.
It has been sunshine and rainbows all week from the Republican National Convention. So there's been that. But then there's also been the lying, the stuff that has been not true and has been insistently and repeatedly not true, especially the dangerous stuff, like the misinformation about coronavirus, talking about the virus as if it's over, showing Americans audiences gathered that have not been tested, that aren't 6 feet apart, that aren't wearing masks. They're trying to visibly create the false impression that there isn't risk for gatherings like this, including tonight. The misinformation on COVID has also included the president hyping hydroxychloroquine, multiple speakers hyping convalescent plasma as if there's a scientific consensus now that that's a miracle treatment for COVID when there's no such thing. This week, we have repeatedly turned to Dr. Vin Gupta to help us reality check some of the wrong COVID claims from the RNC. As we head into this final night, we wanted to talk with him briefly about the cost of all the lies this week on COVID. Joining us once again is Dr. Gupta. He's a pulmonologist and global health policy expert at the University of Washington Medical Center. Doctor, thank you again for being with us. You've been a real comfort to us and a real asset to our team this week.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. Thanks for saying that.
Well, tonight we already know that we've got COVID trouble in terms of the messaging from the RNC with the visuals that we're getting from the White House already for the president's remarks. We think it's about 1,500 people there, very few masks, no social distancing at all. What do you think the American people should know as we're about to get another fire hose blast of this stuff?
You bet. I'm going to try to say this as concisely as possible because there's a lot to say. Number one, 180,000 people didn't have to die. If there was clear, consistent, evidence-based messaging from the start, we have studies suggesting that had we had a national lockdown early in March, we could have renormalized life quickly, more quickly than what we have now, and 80% of lives could have been saved. You just don't hear that. You hear we gloss over constantly people at the megaphone saying, not even acknowledging the death toll, 180,000 and counting. So that's number one, Rachel. Number two, I get asked constantly, I'm right now in an ICU, from family members, teachers across the country, families across the country, where do I go for a source of truth? No one knows because they see the FDA and the CDC getting co-opted by politics. Director Redfield, it's basically having to walk back the confusing guidance on asymptomatic testing. Nobody now knows, do or do not need to get tested. I have public health leaders across the country basically saying we are ignoring the CDC, saying what Governor Newsom said in California. That's problematic. Commissioner Hahn on plasma made no sense. He cited a number on Sunday, 35% of people that receive plasma survive relative to those who do not. Blatantly false. No evidence. So you know what this means, Rachel? This means that when we have a vaccine that hopefully looks good to experts, that there is evidence in science to back up a quality of vaccine. Basically, the president has given a platform to anti-vaxxers because nobody trusts them. Nobody trusts what the FDA is going to put out there, so we're going to have a problem.
Dr. Vin Gupta from the University of Washington Medical Center has been with us all week and will be with us further on tonight. Dr. Gupta, thank you.
This is the same guy when people came out of Charlottesville and a young woman gets killed, they're spewing hate and their veins bulging and carrying swastikas and white supremacists. And he get asked, what about what just happened? He said, they're very fine people on both sides. He just keeps pouring fuel on the fire. He's encouraging this. He's not diminishing it at all. This is his America now. And you want to end where we are now, we've got to end his tenure as president.
You know, Eugene, I worked for a president who was very unpopular in some parts of this country, but when something happened, he always sought to make it better in any way that he could. And sometimes that meant deploying First Lady Mrs. Bush. Sometimes that meant standing back. But he always had the aim of solving any problem where people were hurting. And I'll be the first to say sometimes we came up short. But Donald Trump doesn't even start at that place. And I think it's time to stop shaving the truth out of these conversations. I haven't heard the White House rebuke this young man with a long gun who went in to a community that is reeling from a police shooting last week. I haven't heard Donald Trump say what we've just said, that the same police force in the same week treated a black man and a white assassin, I think we can call him. He murdered 2 people in cold blood very differently. I haven't heard anything.
No, you haven't, and I don't think you will. I mean, you haven't heard them rebuke the young man. You haven't heard, you did last night, you certainly didn't hear Mike Pence say Jacob Blake's name. You don't hear the names of the people whose deaths and injuries are the cause of the turmoil and the unrest and the protests that we've been seeing for months now. You see no grappling whatsoever with systemic racism and its outcomes, its tragic outcomes, because they don't want to acknowledge that it even exists. Again, they seem to believe that either they don't believe it exists, which is hard for me to believe, or they believe that acknowledging it would be offensive to some of their base, that it would disappoint some of the base, that it would conflict with their attempt to sort of scare everybody about all those black people out there and those brown people out there who are coming to move next door to you in the suburbs and make your life a living hell, you suburban housewives. I mean, I guess they think it would conflict with that message to acknowledge the problem that they're making worse. I'm just looking through the New York Times reporting on Mr. Rittenhouse.
I think there were calls for vigilantes to go that were on Facebook. I mean, This story being in the same town, being responded to by the same police force, involving a 17-year-old who had an affinity for Donald Trump, so much so that he went to one of his rallies, who seemed to be aware of or responding to calls from, I think, Facebook and Reddit to be there. This seems to indict everything and everyone, frankly, with some blood on their hands. 2 people are dead. You think anything changes?
Well, look, I don't think you could put it in the problem in more stark relief than that, right? I mean, when Jacob Blake was approached by police who were responding to some sort of domestic dispute, and we haven't heard all the details and all of that, but somehow they escalated it to the point where, as you said, the officer held his T-shirt and shot him 7 times in the back. Now, and Kyle Rittenhouse walks down the street, people are yelling behind him, that guy's was shooting people, and the officers just sort of let him just walk merrily by. It's not as if there was nothing suspicious about his behavior, and in fact, it was illegal for him in the state of Wisconsin to open carry a weapon like that. He was 17 years old. They obviously wouldn't have known that, but he certainly looked young. It was certainly somebody you would stop in the middle of a chaotic situation, if only to take that weapon out of the equation. Yet he wasn't stopped, and it was as if they were happy he was there. And so what is a black man in America to do if my skin is a threat, if my skin is a weapon and a danger to any police officer? What are you supposed to do? It's frustrating and infuriating, and I think that's what you've been seeing over the last few months.
Eugene, far be it from me, a white Republican, to push back on anything you're saying, but let me do so anyway. Here goes nothing. What do we need to know? I mean, I know we don't know everything, but Jacob Blake certainly hadn't just shot 2 people, and he wasn't carrying a long rifle.
Right.
What do you mean we need to know? I mean, I guess the point is the dehumanization is we're going to wait and learn more before we say anything bad about these.
Exactly, and we don't need to we don't need to know any more details because, as I said, it's a domestic dispute. You de-escalate it. You separate people and you go on about your merry way, and everybody patches up, or maybe somebody leaves and goes someplace else or whatever. But you handle it in a human way, and that's the thread that's common through these situations. George Floyd, allegedly, somebody said he passed a phony $20 bill, and Rayshard Brooks fell asleep in the drive-in line at a Wendy's. And so these situations that are routine, normal situations that should be dealt with without an officer even thinking about drawing a weapon and pointing it at someone. Yet, when African Americans are involved, they end up ending in tragedy. So, no, you're right. And I didn't mean to say we needed to know more to know what's going on here, because we don't need to know anymore. This is a pattern that we've seen over and over and over again.
And Aisha, I don't ever mean to put myself in the story, especially not this one, but let me just say this. What's going to happen tonight is that Donald Trump is going to lie to the country. Sadly, a lot of people are going to believe him, if you're among the very small TV audience compared to last week watching, when he blames lawlessness on Democratic mayors and governors. Some of what's happening in the streets is sort of unprocessed grief and rage, frankly, at what Doc Rivers has put voice to, Dom Smith at the Mets put voice to, that it seems like people don't care. It keeps happening. And I might be wrong. Donald Trump might go out there and say, I stand with these families who have lost African-American men, sons, fathers, brothers. He may humanize. I doubt it. I'm pretty sure I'm on safe ground saying that's not likely to happen. But if it does, I'll be the first to say I was wrong. But I want to ask you where the human piece gets addressed. We've got 68 days to go before an incredibly consequential election, but we still have to fix the human piece just in how we talk about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, for example, we're talking so much about the perpetrators and the alleged perpetrators. And really, there's this debate back and forth between two sides about who's a perpetrator. So I believe that the cops are wrong. Most of us believe that the cops are wrong. And also, this white man who was a vigilante who decided to go and assassinate people, he also was wrong. Donald Trump's people believe that, well, it's the protesters who are wrong. We're having all of this debate about who the perpetrators are and zero conversation about accountability. I think that we get to more of the dignity, the respect, the justice when we acknowledge the fact that we keep watching this clip of this white man walking down the street wielding an illegal firearm. This is a rifle that he's got hanging around his body. Who are the cops that are in those cars watching him walk across that street and driving by? All of them should be held accountable. There must be some disciplinary action. For the people on the force who watched this man, didn't stop, ask him a question, nothing. That's where we need to really be focusing our ire and also our conversation, because the truth is that the reason that the cops are out there killing people, and unabashedly so in some instances, is because there hasn't been real deep accountability to them. They're folks who believe they're above the law and continue to believe that because we're not examining them. I would love to see the faces and know the people who are supposed to be protecting and serving and being paid, by the way, by the tax dollars of folks in that state to do their jobs. And here they are driving by while a person walks down the street armed, who, and not even to stop and see, you know, if they're dangerous, but like, what in the world are you doing walking around with this weapon? I think that the conversation lens needs to change, and we need to stop the back and forth about, well, they brought it on themselves, or this is the perpetrator, and really talk about all the people whose jobs it is to make sure that this isn't happening, and what are they doing with themselves?
You, though rightfully angry and exhausted, and after the murders of Breonna and George and Ahmaud and so many others, it's no wonder people are taken to the streets. And I support them. We must always defend peaceful protest and peaceful protesters. We should not confuse them with those looting and committing acts of violence, including the shooter who was arrested for murder. And make no mistake, we will not let these vigilantes and extremists derail the path to justice. Here's my promise to those mothers and fathers and all who stand with them. In a Biden-Harris administration, you will have a seat at the table. Here's what you have to understand about the nature of a pandemic. It's relentless. You can't stop it with a tweet. You can't create a distraction and hope it'll go away. It doesn't go away. By its nature, a pandemic is unforgiving. If you get it wrong at the beginning, the consequences are catastrophic. And it's very hard to catch up. You don't get a second chance at getting it right. Well, President Trump, he got it wrong from the beginning. And then he got it wrong again and again.
Senator Kamala Harris's reality check to a nation reeling under multiple crises is where we start today. Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson's here. Also joining us, Associated Press White House reporter Jonathan Lemire. Democratic strategist Aisha Mills will join us in a few moments. Jonathan Lemire, let me start with you. I thought if you had intel about all the places where you could hurt Donald politically and then wrote a speech about those places, that was the speech Senator Harris delivered today.
Well, we just saw right there, Nicole, one of the reasons why Senator Harris is on the ticket. They saw her time in the Senate in a number of high-profile committee hearings, the withering questioning, her prosecutorial background shining through, the way she can pick apart a case, or in this case, an opponent. This was some withering attacks from Senator Harris today on a number of levels. Certainly, you know, first and foremost, breaking very much what we've heard from the Republican convention all week in terms of talking about not just Kenosha, depicting it in terms of violence or of rioting, which we've heard from administration officials and other Republicans, but rather, though certainly condemning the violence that has followed, but very much speaking to the reason for the protests, the suffering that black men have had far too often at the hands of white police officers. She gave voice to that, something that the administration to this point has not done. And then, yes, she went after Donald Trump point by point, condemning his handling of the pandemic, suggesting that the biggest moment of his presidency, he was scared, that he froze. That's what she said today. Said that she showed reckless judgment, that he put himself above the American people, suggesting, of course, that his number one job, his sacred duty as president, is to protect the safety and well-being and livelihoods of American citizens. And she said today, and laid out very plainly, that she did not. And while this certainly was not quite the degree of trolling that we saw from last week when Donald Trump went to Scranton, Joe Biden's old hometown, in the hours before Joe Biden gave his acceptance speech, the fact that Senator Harris did this today, a half mile from the White House, just a few hours before the president goes on stage over here on the South Lawn, certainly caught Donald Trump's attention.
The word she used, Eugene, I think was negligence. You know, that he was guilty of negligence, that he was alerted. She didn't make these points, but we all know from reporting in your newspaper and from Jonathan and his colleagues in that press corps, he was made aware of the lethal nature of coronavirus by the intelligence community in January. And then she laid out very methodically, using his own words, to build a case against him. These seem like the kind of fact-based indictments that have the only chance of cutting through the so far 3-night-long propaganda reel coming from Donald Trump's campaign.
Yeah, I mean, if you need a prosecutor, she's like Jack McCoy on Law and Order. I mean, she just she laid out the case in an elegant and powerful way. You know, negligence, reckless indifference. There was a point at which she after building the case, she basically said, you know, Donald Trump never understood the presidency. He thought it was about him. It's not supposed to be about him. It's supposed to be about the American people. And she came to that conclusion after having laid out all the ways in which he had failed the country. I thought it was very effective counter-programming for the Republican convention, especially in tandem with the interview that President Biden gave to Andrea Mitchell earlier in the day, which in a less formal way hit some of the same themes, but she was thorough.
Hidden punchline with violence and with violence in the streets.
He praised the transparency of the Chinese government. He said, quote, China has been working hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency.
Just Aisha Mel. Let's listen first.
On January 24th, he praised the transparency of the Chinese government. He said, quote, China has been working hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well. But they weren't being transparent. They blocked public health inspectors from our CDC from getting access and information that they needed to protect American lives. On a call with governors across the country on March 16th, he told them it wasn't his job to get personal protective equipment to frontline workers. He said, quote, respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourselves, unquote. On that day, we had about 5,000 cases as a nation. Today, we have nearly 6 million.
It's just staggering, Aisha. When you listen to the facts, I guess you have to hope, if you're still living in reality in fact-based America, not the target audience for this week's programming, that the facts still make the American people hope that we can do better.
Well, I would hope they do. You know, my favorite thing, and first of all, hi, Nicole.
Hi.
My favorite thing about Senator soon-to-be Vice President Harris is that she does show up with an attorney spirit of stating the facts in a way that are crystal clear, and you just can't argue against them without, frankly, lying and trying to hoodwink people and suggest that, like, oh, well, you know, believe maybe what I'm not saying. Donald Trump is always trying to do gymnastics with the way that he makes arguments. Sometimes, you know, he makes them plain. Sometimes he backtracks. Kamala Harris is always straight and to the point and states the facts. I think, this is the thing I think about a lot, actually. As a Democrat, watching our convention last week, going into this election, I'm constantly thinking about how we're messaging to the people who really need to get fired up and animated. I'm the person that's the choir, right? So Kamala Harris speaking to me, I'm listening to those facts. I'm like, yes, I remember when that happened. The question becomes, can we message in a way that the average, decent and kind of thoughtful American says, oh, wow, I forgot about that. I didn't remember. I think that Kamala Harris, the attorney for the people, is exactly the person who can do that and just state a plain case in layman's terms. I think that she did that today. It'll be interesting to see, though, more importantly, how this may or may not derail Donald Trump tonight. You know that all the guy does is sit around and watch TV. And so as he is going into his big speech, I think it was extremely strategic for Harris to have done this in advance, to kind of preempt and have a pre-buttal, because I think that that's also going to, stir up something for Donald Trump, which will make plain to the American people in the clips that come out of it that he also can't just focus on what he's doing, because he's so busy running around trying to manage his reputation and poke at other people that he can't just focus on his narrative.
Jonathan, Aisha makes a really good point. Neither convention is programmed for, either the people who are enthusiastic about Biden and Harris, or the people who are sold hook, line, and sinker for the whole sort of Trump airbrushing of the last 3.5 years. It's for the people who aren't sure, who maybe, chose mystery basket Trump. Not that it was a mystery. His racism and misogyny were on full display, but they said, well, let's try this. Both sides are talking to that audience. And what struck me about Senator Harris's speech is there have been efforts to use her history as a prosecutor against him, frankly, from both sides. But at this moment, in Donald Trump's America, and that is exactly what this is, a programming note. When you hear Donald Trump talk about how scary things will be if Joe Biden takes over, things are scary now, because Donald Trump has lit the match and thrown it into these raw, painful wounds of systemic racism. That's why the things that are happening in the streets are happening. And it's a 17-year-old with a long gun who shot 2 people and then walked by police, the very same police who held a black man by his T-shirt and shot him 7 times. That's why there's violence. And those things are happening in Donald Trump's America. We can hope that they get better in Joe Biden's America should he win. But the truth and the fact right now is that they're happening in Donald Trump's America.